In India, the suspicious death of a young woman on May 12 of 2026 has triggered public outrage. But the most disturbing part is this. There is nothing unusual about this larger pattern. Women's deaths in India inside marriages are still too often explained as accidents, suicides, and private family tragedies, while the deeper machinery of control, coercion, and dowry pressure remains hidden behind closed doors. What makes Twisha Sharma's case so unnerving is not that it is different from hundreds of others, but that on paper, this should not have happened to someone like her. Hi, welcome to Collectively Vigilant. I'm Dr. D. I'm a professor and a lawyer, and I'm usually joined by Sam, who is a high school teacher and a counselor. If you're here for the first time, well, welcome. Here at Collectively Vigilant, we learn the law through true crime. So, if you like this kind of thing, please consider subscribing to this channel. Over the last year and a half, we have covered around 56 cases, and now we are also retelling the same stories in Hindi as well. Now, I have a question for all the people who regularly tune into the podcast, and I hope you're going to comment on this because this is a real question. Shall I separate the Hindi episodes from the English ones into a different podcast, or should I keep them all together? Is it annoying to suddenly get an episode in a completely different language in your regular feed? Please let me know your thoughts and I'll organize things accordingly. Secondly, let me address the elephant in the room. You must have noticed that the upload schedule is extremely uneven. In some months, you will see that I have 4 episodes out, and then there are other months where I hardly upload anything. Well, the truth is that this is a one woman operation. I'm the one who researches everything, I write everything, I narrate everything, I edit everything, I handle everything. And this is basically on top of being a full time professor. I also work as an adjunct at a law school. And, I also work as a lawyer for real life cases as well. I know this sounds like an excuse. It kind of is an excuse, but the reality of producing a research heavy podcast completely independently, it takes a toll on you. So once the semester begins, it's almost the end of the spring semester now. So hopefully things will get better. But, I really don't have that much time for the podcast once, everything's in full swing. So, anyway, with that out of the way, let me start with the story of Twisha Sharma. If there was one woman in India this whole thing should not have happened to, it would be Twisha Sharma. She was 33 years old, an MBA graduate, a former model, a former actress, a corporate professional, and she also won a beauty pageant. She was, in a sense, the embodiment of the modern Indian woman. She was educated, she was polished, she was extremely ambitious, and also highly visible. And yet, despite all this, she appears to have met exactly the same fate that so many women have met before her. She was slowly crushed under the weight of dowry expectations, family pressure, and a marriage that looked extremely ordinary from the outside. She was a sought after professional, a beauty queen, and even then, she was trapped in what some people have called a vanilla wedding. So, today, let's unpack the suspicious death of Twisha Sharma and the uncomfortable questions at the heart of this tragedy. Because if a woman like Twisha is not safe, then who is? So, let's start with her story. On her haldi ceremony, which is the ceremony which happens before the day of your marriage, Twisha was a radiant young woman, and not in a way that looked like a performance. She was laughing easily on that day. She danced without being self conscious. She was fully engaged, completely unguardedly happy. The kind of happiness people don't manufacture for a camera, the kind of happiness people actually feel. When her brother Harshit smeared turmeric paste all over her face and hands as part of the ceremony, the two of them locked eyes and both nearly broke down crying. Tears of joy and the remarkable ache of a brother who's watching his sister prepare to leave his home. No one in that room could have known that the footage of that day will not be preserved as a happy memory, but only months later it will be picked apart frame by investigators trying to understand how she died. On her wedding day, she walked towards the mandap, which is the sanctum sanctorum where you sort of stand up and get married. It's basically like a mini stage. She was flanked by all her brothers, and her would be husband, Samarth, took her hand lovingly. They exchanged garlands and they looked longingly into each other's eyes and they promised to spend the rest of their lives with each other. At her giving away ceremony, which is called Bidae, her father held her closely and they both cried. However, half of that joy was basically seeing a daughter get married into a really good family. Twisha arrived from her house near New Delhi, the state of Madhya Pradesh, in a place called Bhopal. She arrives in Bhopal in an upmarket location of Katara Hills. However, within a year, the same space would be the site of a criminal investigation. To her family, Twisha's marriage looked like a triumph. Samarth, the husband, was a criminal lawyer practicing in the Bhopal district court. His mother, Giribala Singh, was a retired judge. She was not an ordinary woman, she was a woman who had spent her entire life on the bench and now also sat as a judge in the consumer forum. Twisha wasn't just marrying a man, she was marrying, at least in her family's eyes, she was marrying into an institution of respectability. The kind of family whose name also opens a lot more doors than would have been open for her previously. She reorganized her whole life around this man. She gave up her job near New Delhi and moved to a new city to be Samarth's wife. For a while, it was exactly that good, or at least from the outside, it looked so. Then came her honeymoon in January of 2025. At Bhopal airport, as they were leaving, something happened that nobody thought much about, at least at that time. There was a delay in their flight booking, and Samarth, by Twisha's family accounts, shoved her really hard, and that really frightened Twisha. The word of this shoving, of course, reached Twisha's parents, and her family asked her to chalk it up to be Samarth being in bad temper on that particular day. And that kind of temperament, of course, everyone weathers in their marriage at least once or twice, and that's about it. That's what everyone thought. However, nobody imagined that this would be a thread which would lead to a larger unraveling. Because within days, Twisha discovered something about her husband that was never revealed to her. He used drugs very heavily. According to Twisha's family, he had been a drug addict for years. When she caught him in the act and refused to join him, he allegedly turned violent towards her. She went to her mother-in-law expecting some concern and expecting to find an ally in her mother-in-law. Instead, the mother-in-law's reaction suggested that this wasn't news to her at all. She had known all this all along, and apparently so did everyone in the Bar Council of Bhopal. Samarth's habits were almost like an open secret. It was later reported that he, and by that I mean Samarth, had even lost 2 years of his college life because he was in and out of rehabs. If that's true, it seems this was hidden from Twisha and her family. Twisha found herself living with a man who wore 2 completely different faces. Composed and dutiful in front of her parents and her family, protected and excused in front of his own mother. Whenever she tried to raise what was happening, with either her own parents or her mother in law, she was met with both disbelief and denial. Then she found that she was pregnant. It should have been the easiest part of this whole story to tell. However, unfortunately, according to Twisha's family, she made the decision in good conscience not to carry that pregnancy because of her husband's drug usage and his long spurts of anger. She did not want to put her new baby into danger. So she went ahead and had an abortion. And instead of grief or understanding, her husband turned this particular moment into a series of accusations, questioning if she was even carrying his child. Giribala, the mother in law, meanwhile, is said to have been consumed by something else entirely. She was consumed by the fact that her older son's marriage had ended in a divorce years earlier, which made Twisha's pregnancy the only remaining hope for this family to have a grandchild. When the pregnancy was ended by Twisha, the anger in the house was palpable. Nobody thought of Twisha's well being. Everyone mourned the loss of a would be heir. The moments that followed describe a slow tightening around Twisha. Both Giribala, the mother in law, and Samath, the husband, commented on how Twisha did not measure up. Comments were made about the money which was spent on the wedding. Comments were made about the monthly allowance Samarth was supposed to give to Twisha, to the point where Twisha's parents were reportedly quietly transferring money to her so that she wouldn't have to ask a single penny from her husband. And underneath all these small humiliations, there was something larger, an alleged demand that she sign over about 20 lakh rupees in investments that her own father had placed in her name into Samad's name. Now, 20 lakh rupees is about 17,000 US dollars. And according to Twisha's cousins, she tried to leave a few times. And according to one of her cousins, she left once entirely. However, Samath talked her back, and so did Twisha's parents. It seemed that everyone was hoping against hope that everything would become better. But of course it didn't. On April 22nd of 2026, Twisha's brother Harshit, who's an army officer, went to her marital home in Bhopal to confront Twisha's mother-in-law Giribala Singh, the former judge. The conversation was recorded by Harshit, and I'm so glad that he did that because that now serves as a really big piece of evidence against the mother in law and the husband. In this conversation, one can hear that Harshit, the army officer, the brother, is allegedly trying to defend Twisha against the volley of bad language that Giribala Singh uses against her own daughter in law. It's rather degrading language, and she is defending her own son. In the conversation, Giribala allegedly is defending her own degrading language her son has been using against his own wife, Twisha, and then confronting. In this conversation, one that Harshit recorded, one can hear the mother-in-law Giribala Singh using degrading language against her own daughter-in-law and also questioning her dating history and her body count. She had said vile things to her daughter-in-law, things like, what is your body count? Don't make sleeping with men a habit. And when Harshit, the brother, who's also, as I said, the army officer, he confronted the mother-in-law, who's a former judge, by the way, about her language use against her own daughter-in-law. She snaps back and says that it's my right to know my daughter-in-law's body count because this is a matter of my family name. However, there's another thread in the story that's harder to place with certainty because it comes from only one single family account rather than from independently confirmed sources. Very early on in the marriage, it's been reported that Twisha discovered her husband in a compromising situation with another man. And at that time, both men explained it away as a misunderstanding. Whether or not that thread connects to something larger, we would not know. If that was the reason behind the emotional distance in the wedding, well, duh, it would be. However, the hostility and the pressure to have a baby on Twisha was increasing every day, and they were very aggressive towards her ever since she got an abortion. This speculation, as I said, has not been established, but this is worth looking into. This might have been one of the reasons why they were so furious that she had an abortion. Because, of course, if he was a gay man and is a gay man, he would not want to sleep with his own wife again. By the first week of May of 2026, Twisha's life was unraveling in real time. And one can trace this with the messages that she was sending on WhatsApp to her family, to her cousins, and to her own brother. In the early hours of May 7 of 2026, she wrote to her mother asking to be taken away, saying that she didn't even know anymore what she had done wrong, why they were putting so much emotional and psychological pressure on her. 2 days later, on May 9th, 2026, she told her mother that Samarth was throwing the abortion back in her face time and time again for the past 1 week. Her mother's advice, reportedly, was to let it go and to wait it out. The same day, Twisha messaged one of her cousins and she used three extremely loaded words. She said, "I feel trapped." She even called her brother Harshit on that day and she told him about the non stop psychological pressure that she was under by both Samarth, her husband, and Giribala Singh, the mother in law. He told her that she should not move back with their parents. She should instead come and live with him and his new wife in the state of Rajasthan in a particular place called Ajmer. So he was open to helping her, and he has been her ally since the first day. On the morning of May 12th of 2026, she booked a train ticket to leave in 3 days. So the ticket was booked for May 15th of 2026. On the same day, which was May 12th, she walks out of her house, she goes to a beauty parlor, and one can see all this on a CCTV footage of the beauty parlor. She looks very calm, she looks very composed. It doesn't look like she's in crisis or if anything, she looks like someone, according to me, who had already decided that she was going to escape from this situation. At around 5 p.m. on May 12th of 2026, we can see from the CCTV footage from inside her home that she was watching TV, and then later in the evening she speaks to her mom on the phone. And to speak to her mom confidentially, rather than doing it inside the house, she walks up to the terrace and she was trying to have a private conversation. 10 minutes into that conversation, one can Twisha's mom could hear that Samarth, the husband, had sort of walked up to the terrace, and the phone call is abruptly cut off around 10:05, 10:06 p.m. By 10:20 p.m. on May 12 of 2026, Giribala, the mother-in-law, calls up Twisha's parents and says, "Twisha is not breathing. We are rushing her to the All India Institute of Medical Sciences." 15 minutes later, Giribala Singh, the mother in law, calls Twisha's parents one more time, and this time she says Twisha had hung herself. What happened in the investigation afterwards raises so many questions, not only about Twisha's death, but also how things were handled. A belt was recovered from the scene. However, that belt was never sent for forensic testing until 3 days later after the postmortem had already been completed, which means whatever conclusion the doctors reached, they reached it without ever looking at the central piece of evidence in this whole case. No note was ever found confessing to any kind of suicide. Um, Twisha's height, which was recorded at post mortem, does not actually match the height which is reported everywhere in the media, because remember, Twisha was an actor. So these kind of things are out there about actors, at least approximations. Twisha's own family says that she's actually much taller than what the coroner's office has reported. And the height really matters here because the ligature length is exactly what the forensic teams should be able to work out if they claim that she had hung herself. There's a gap of over an hour between when the mother in law says that she rushed Twisha to the hospital and the actual hospital records, which say that Twisha's body arrived much later. The first call to the police was not from the husband's family. It was actually from Twisha's own family, who, remember, live in a completely different state. And within a day of the FIR, which is the first incident report, finally going through, Giribala Singh, the retired judge, was already granted an anticipatory bail on a token bond, which is really, really low. While Samarth, the husband, disappeared from the scene altogether, and he was not seen anywhere for the next 10 days. He was reportedly on the run, and eventually he did surrender himself 10 days later in a place called Jabalpur. Some partial CCTV footage has surfaced and the police has released it, and we can see it all over on Indian news channels. However, Twisha's family says that it is heavily edited. And I think people who have seen it on TV can say that as well. So can I, because one can see Twisha going up, and then you just automatically see three people bringing her down, and we never see anyone else going up behind her. When she's walking up, she's wearing shorts and a t shirt, and there is nothing in her hand other than her cell phone. So, where did that belt come from? That's also a central question. Upon Twisha's family's urging and media pressure, the FIR was eventually lodged against Giribala Singh, as I said, and she's already been given an anticipatory bail. And the important thing about this FIR is that it was actually filed 3 days after, and it says that this is a dowry related death, which happens in India. I mean, if you die within the first few years of your marriage, it is usually because of dowry. Back to the CCTV footage. It's been edited in such a way that one can only see Samarth performing CPR on his wife when she's brought downstairs. So that's where it begins. That's where the frame begins. However, it has to be noted that the terrace was actually not under CCTV camera surveillance. So we don't know what happened there. If that footage does exist, it has not been handed over to the police and the media has not gotten wind of it. However, Giribala Singh, the mother in law, is eerily calm, and there is this one point which is really, really eerie, where she steps into a room all alone, and then after a few seconds she walks downstairs, and her behavior is so strange, because if your daughter-in-law's life has just been cut short, or as they claim, it was not cut short at that time, they claim that she was still breathing at that time when they rescued her, they were trying CPR on her, she's eerily calm the whole time. After Twisha's alleged suicide, roughly 6 calls were made by the mother in law. And it's really interesting that the first few calls were made to fellow judges. And then one of the phone calls was also to the head of the state's investigative agency. And of course, there were also phone calls made to the people who installed CCTV cameras in her house. These are the 6 phone calls which have come to light after a lot of media pressure. Not that Giribala Singh, the retired judge, was actually willing to hand this over herself. Even the medical defense has fallen apart under public scrutiny. The mother in law presented a prescription to the media which was meant to paint Twisha Sharma, the deceased, as an unstable, drug dependent young woman. But the diagnosis is that the paper that she's showing to the media, it just says the word adjustment disorder, which, as all of us know who listen to true crime a lot or who have degrees in psychology, can be any kind of adjustment. I mean, it takes time to adjust to a new city, so it could be that, it could be so many things. And apparently, the mother in law has also been saying to the media that the daughter in law was on constant anti anxiety meds, antidepressant medicines. And she has even gone on to say that because Twisha's her own father used to work in the pharmaceutical agency, he must have been supplying all these drugs to his own daughter. There is no other documentation of this except the one piece of paper she keeps showing to the media. In late May of 2026, the case was later escalated because a lot of media pressure to the CBI, which is kind of like the FBI of India, and Samarth's law license was also suspended by the Bar Council of India. Giribala Singh's bail was revoked by the Madhya Pradesh court, and she was later taken into custody. And Twisha, the woman in all this, okay, the victim, who was a model, who was an actress at one point, who competed in beauty pageants, who built a whole life for her outside of being publicly visible by getting an MBA, working in corporate jobs, who by the way also meditated and taught yoga, has now become a nobody in this whole trial. By now, Twisha has just become yet another name, a sad statistic in the long line of women who have died because of dowry in India. Right. So, as I said, this young woman who is now dead at the age of 33 has been put on a media trial under the scrutiny of 1.3 billion people. While Samarth, the husband, was still absconding at one point, Giribala Singh, the mother in law, was already busy, not with the lawyers, but in front of television cameras. In roughly 2 weeks, she gave interview after interview, and the picture she painted of her daughter in law kept shifting. Sometimes she even contradicts herself within the same conversation. In one breath, she calls Twisha schizophrenic. Supposedly, according to the mother in law, the daughter in law was hearing a fourth voice in her head. In another interview, she says that Twisha was a heavy drug user and sh- someone who continued to use drugs throughout her pregnancy before she got an abortion. In one of the television interviews, Giribala even pretends to cry in front of the cameras. And then she says that Twisha denied her family a grandchild. And as you can imagine, a lot of people were very sympathetic to her about that, because how can a woman make a decision about her own body without taking the permission of her mother in law? So Giribala cries in front of the cameras, and in almost every conversation, she also seems to be saying that Twisha was really distressed by her own pregnancy, and in the words of the mother-in-law, it was almost as if the baby was killing her from within, whatever that means. She claims that Twisha had spent about a few lakh rupees in the last few months of marriage, and also kept the keys of a mystery car and an unexplained house far away from the city. None of these things seem to have any standing in actual evidence. She turned on Twisha's parents, and she basically accused the parents of being gold diggers who pushed their daughter into the world of modeling and acting very early on in life, and fed her weight loss pills and exploited their own daughter financially. She even suggested that Twisha's father, who was in the pharmaceutical background and frequently went out of the country, had been drugging his own daughter. Now, in all this media narrative, I want to bring to your attention the one thing which is not addressed. How did Twisha even die on that day? What happened to her on that terrace? Every claim about Twisha is supposedly about Twisha's mind, Twisha's habits, Twisha's money, Twisha's faith or the lack thereof. No one is addressing the ligature marks, the injuries. A part of her earlobe seems to have been exceptionally bruised. When her own family inspected her own body, one of her cousins stepped out and said clearly she'd been beaten on the night before her eventual demise. But what's not addressed is the ligature marks, the injuries, or why eight CCTV cameras in the house apparently malfunctioned at the same point when Twisha died. I'd earlier mentioned that there's also a recording that Major Harshit Singh, who is Major Harshit Sharma, who's Twisha's brother, an army officer, he made of the mother in law saying wild things about Twisha's sexual history before the wedding actually happened, and also even says that she continued to sleep with other men even after getting married. Now, all this is just a pattern which we see time and time again in India. What's happening to Twisha is not new at all. As I said earlier in the introduction, it is not isolated in the least. It's a pattern that shows up every single time a woman dies under suspicious circumstances in India, especially one who has some degree of independence, seems to be the kind of woman who's visible, has an Instagram account, has a following, any of those. It's trial by media and trial in absentia, unable to answer any single accusation that has been levied against the mother-in-law or the husband. The actual facts of the case about her untimely death have been pushed to the margin. And we have seen this happen before. Twisha is not the only one. It happened very, very prominently in 2014 when Sunanda Pushkar, who was the wife of a very prominent Indian politician, her she apparently died of overdose in a very prominent hotel. And when she was rushed to the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, rather than concentrating on the fact that the agencies clearly say that she was poisoned on that day, the media narrative was how Sunanda Pushkar, the wife, couldn't take it that her own husband is so good looking that all over India women throw themselves at him. So that was the narrative rather than how did she die of poisoning. It had also happened back in 2013 when a prominent actress called Jia Khan was found hanging, and her own boyfriend's family made a public narrative about Jia Khan being really depressed because of being a failed actress, and that she had attempted several multiple suicide attempts even before the boyfriend stepped into the scene. Rather than covering why she died, why these women die, why, if it's truly so that these women have taken their own lives, why are they pushed to the brim to do that despite being really successful women? The media coverage is always about the salacious details of their life. It also happened in a very different way to a 13-year-old child who became a media sensation in 2008. Her name was Arushi Tarwar. She had died in her family home. Her parents were sleeping in a room probably 10 feet away from her, and somehow her body was recovered from her own bedroom. And what the media concentrated on was speculating the parents' private life rather than the murder and how that happened. There were shameful things said about this child, which reinforced that the entire family is promiscuous, oversensitive. There was a troubled marriage. These were difficult people. Both her parents are prominent dentists in Delhi. Repeatedly, time after time, all media channels couldn't stop labeling accusations towards this child and her parents rather than concentrating on how a child was found dead in her own house. The most convenient thing that the Indian media seems to do to dead women is they put the characters of these women on trial. And Twisha is no different. As I said earlier, she had modeled, she had acted, she had competed in beauty pageants, completed an MBA, had a corporate career. She did all this. However, none of this is of any use in the Indian media because all they concentrate on are the salacious details that have absolutely no standing in reality, which the mother in law seems to be spinning in front of the media every day. So, on this really sad note, I'd like to stop here for today. And I would love to hear your thoughts about this particular case. If you remember any other case which I might not have mentioned when I was trying to look at the larger pattern, if there is something that I've left out, please let me know. And hopefully, Sam will be back in a week or two. This is also very sort of busy time for her as well. As I said, semesters are ending everywhere. So it's just a busy time for everyone. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. And until I see you again, stay collectively vigilant.